Well, good evening and welcome to our third panel discussion on the hotly debated topic of generative AI in art and design education, particularly here at School of Visual Arts. I'm Christopher Cyphers, SVA's Provost. Oh, that's not usually the response I get, but thank you. I'll take it. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation, Opportunities and Challenges, New Perspectives from Design Educators on Generative AI. Breath. It's a pleasure to have you all here. It was exactly a year ago that we had our first such panel discussion, which was in response to a great deal of consternation among the faculty and students over the implications of generative AI or GenAI. The event was titled Crisis or Opportunity. We've evolved a bit since then. At the time, there was a lot of pearl clutching and calls for prohibitions on the use of AI, as our panelists then contemplated in the broadest sense the impact this rapidly evolving technology would have on the creative economy and the education of our students. There were some feisty exchanges between the panelists and audience members. I suspect there might be this evening as well. By the end of that evening, the panelists mused that perhaps the better title for the panel would have been Crisis and Opportunity, which was at least a tacit recognition that GenAI wasn't the worst thing to befall our institution and the industries that support it. In the year that has passed, a group of faculty members and IT professionals at SVA, led by Associate Provost Emily Ross, developed a set of guiding principles for the ethical use of AI in the classroom and studio. Those principles have since been widely shared, along with a set of guidelines for faculty and department chairs on developing AI usage policies. In brief, we acknowledge that generative AI is here to stay and will only grow more sophisticated and ubiquitous. As an institution, we are committed to the art of storytelling, the primacy of the artist and designer as author, and the rights of artists and designers to have their work protected. At the same time, we know that many of the industries our graduates will enter are actively using AI tools in their workflows, and moreover, that there is an expectation that those coming out of SVA and its peer institutions will have some working knowledge of AI. It is therefore incumbent upon us to expose students to the fundamentals of AI, since preparing our students for work in the creative industries is a central part of our mission. To that end, our academic and studio departments have started in varying degrees to introduce AI into coursework. The SVA libraries have assembled some great resources on a myriad of topics related to AI, and our Office of Learning Technologies has conducted numerous workshops for faculty ranging on what is AI to how to incorporate the topic of AI into the academic and studio curricula and teaching. From where I sit, or stand as the case may be, we seem to be moving at the right pace. Naturally, for some, we're moving too fast, and for others, we're not moving fast enough. But we are moving forward, mindful that a balance must be struck between encouraging explorations of this awesomely powerful technology and preventing a rush to blindly embracing it. In October, I hosted a second panel discussion in cooperation with our colleagues from Chung-Ang University, or CAU, in Seoul, South Korea. The focus was on the use of AI in the animation industry. Over the course of 2 days following the panel, the CAU delegation conducted a series of workshops for students and faculty on some of the GenAI tools in wide use today by animators and filmmakers. And that brings us to this evening's discussion, where our panelists will share their experiences and thinking on GenAI in the design industry, broadly defined. Design at the undergraduate and graduate levels is among our largest and most popular majors, and like illustration, currently our largest BFA program, there is a lot at stake for designers working amidst an ever greater use of AI in design practice. We have an outstanding group of design educators and practitioners assembled who will no doubt, for what will no doubt be a thoughtful and probing exploration of the intersection of GenAI and design education. The moderator of this evening's panel is the not so recently inaugurated chair of SVA's MFA design program, the OG of our now multiple design graduate programs, Mr. Randy Hunt. Before I bring up the panel, I want to thank Jennifer Phillips, Director of the Office of Learning Technologies, for organizing this event, and Michael Severance from my office for handling the logistics of hosting it. Of course, I also want to thank our panelists and our moderator for the valuable time they're giving to us this evening. And no, this was not generated by AI. This is me and my magic digits. Now, if you will, please join me in welcoming Randy and tonight's panelists. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good? Great. Should we just do a quick mic check?
Check.
Hello.
Check, check,
Hello.
check.
Nice. Oh, that was good.
Check,
Okay.
check.
I feel like we're about to do a freestyle Love Supreme or like an improv show. Well, thanks for having us, everybody. I'm going to use the opportunity when we get us started for everyone to sort of introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their practice, just so we can get going right into the content. Yeah. So we have, I'll facilitate the discussion here with our awesome panelists, and they'll have some time for audience Q&A. But the time's going to go fast, I'm sure. And I'm excited to learn some stuff, too. I'm sure it's about to happen. The nature of the space is you feel educated yesterday and then uninformed 10 minutes later. So put on your learning caps. Okay, so I'm going to ask you each to sort of introduce yourself by sharing just what your creative practice is briefly. We just have like a couple of minutes here. And then I would like for you to share with us the first sort of surprising or magical experience you had with Gen AI. So we'll start to my left with Pinar Guvenc.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Randy. I'm Pinar. I'm partner at Sour. We are a mission-driven studio with where we address social and urban problems. So with that, obviously, in the last couple of years, we're getting pulled into more and more things around AI, as there are many problems that we can deal with. And at the core of everything we do, we practice co-design. So that's why we serve a very big mission. When you brought up that question, I thought about a more of a surprising, not that pleasantly magical experience, but when Midjourney first came out, as a team, we had a challenge that, like, okay, if we were Pixar characters, what would we be? So let's imagine that. And anybody who knows me, or if you see any of my photos, I'm never, like, not smiling. And my character came out as the most, like, upset, angry-looking, almost evil character. And I was like, does it know something about me that I don't know? Like, it made me paranoid, and I really, to this day, don't understand why that's my character. And we still have, as you know, obviously deep fakes and everything is getting much more crazier. We still keep them because I think it's hilarious. But yeah, that was my first experience of seeing myself in AI, which was not that fun, but surprising.
Thank you for sharing. So we've set the tone. It can go one of two ways. Pinar, what program do you teach in at SVA?
A school of MFA Interaction Design.
Great, perfect. Okay. And next we have Shar Simpson.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Randy, and it's really great to be in conversation with everyone. I'm Shar. I teach in the MFA Visual Narrative program at SVA, and I teach at the Digital Storytelling Lab at Columbia. I have worked with GenAI in a lot of different ways, but probably my favorite sort of first memory is when, in 2017, my friends and I hacked Alexa and created a seance experience with her, where she was the medium. Terrifying. But I co-wrote an interactive script with her, and I remember asking her, Alexa, do you have any friends? And she was like, oh, well, you don't know my friends in the cloud. And I was like, oh man, that's so dark. I don't know what that means. So from there, I've continued to work with AI, mostly in sort of like genre spaces like horror. And I really like creating experiences that promote literacy, but are also thrilling and scary. So that's where I'm coming from.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, next we have Andrea Trabuco-Campos.
Hi, everyone. I'm a graphic designer and a type designer and a partner at Pentagram. Really happy to be here, honored. I'm in no way sort of an expert on AI, but do use it on a daily basis and have been doing that for quite a bit. My first experience was when the first alphas were released in 2022, 2023, where I started prompting it in the field that I'm in love with, which is typography, and just trying to imagine what it would imagine through different prompts. So if different sort of figures throughout history that didn't make typefaces would actually make, and what the typefaces would look like. And so things like, what would a typeface by Picasso look like, Jean Miro, or Annie Albers. And through that, with a friend who is Martina Zambuja, we started a publishing company called Vernacular and published our first book. And that was really sort of kind of the magical sort of twist of events of testing this cutting edge technology, which is AI at that point in its infancy, in something that is millenary, which is typography, in a book form, which is not going to change for many years. So it's a way to capture sort of a moment in time to try to understand and interact with it. And the magical part of this is we got to a point where we became kind of fluent with Midjourney. And instead of sort of, prompting it, we would just sort of think of that entity as an extra being, like we called him MJ. And we would just be like, what would MJ think about this? And we would be like, oh, what, Jean Miro, like, and so it became a lot of fun to kind of think of that. And so the book is actually kind of co-authored with Midjourney, and we give credit to that.
Very nice, thank you.
Super cool. Hey everyone, I'm Federico. Thanks Randy and everyone for joining us tonight. I'm currently a design lead at Google DeepMind. I've been at Google for about 7 years. I also teach in the MFA Interaction Design department. And I would say like one of the most magical, I think, first experiences that I had with generative AI was actually a little bit before it was called generative AI. I have an industrial design background, and so before joining Google, I was working at an industrial design studio. And at the studio, we were actually working with a startup called Embodied. They were working on a little robot called Moxie. It's out, you can look it up. And it was a bunch of research scientists trying to put together a little companion robot that could help kids on the neurodiverse spectrum. And it has a little camera in his forehead, and it helps. The whole story was this robot arrives from space, kids greet it. The robot has no context of anything that's going on, and the robot starts pointing in different directions and asking the child like what something is, and using some image recognition as well as generative dialogue. The child starts having a relationship with the toy. And when I saw one of the first demos, with all the wired elements really exposed, and we were trying to figure out how to solve this, it really struck a chord, the possibility of having a natural conversation using roughly indicative language, like what is that and what are these and I'm tired and who are you, and seeing someone who has very little context of like I think these technologies be able to engage with it and maintain a conversation with it in such a natural format. And that kind of led me to where I am today, working on Gemini and our Gemini family of products. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. And finally, we have Violet Whitney.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. I'm a co-founder of a design and technology company with my partner called Spatial Pixel. And we like to say that our company is about creating spatial computing for your space and not for your face. So everything that we work on is really around doing a lot of things like AI code generation, but the whole premise is exactly what you're talking about. How do we get people to interact with the environment around them versus looking at a screen, and how do we make it more co-present? So I think for me, like the big, and wait, before I tell my story. I have to say, I'm also teaching in the IXD program. Yes. But yes, the thing that was most surprising when first running into these AI tools, I think, was just recognizing how good it is at code generation. I think there was a lot of dismissal of AI in the beginning, and I think as soon as you started writing code with it, I just kept running into like, oh wait, that works. Oh, that was really good. And it would make tons of errors as well, but oh my gosh, so good. And so then we just started trying things like, oh, well, how good is it about doing certain types of spatial reasoning? And coming from a physical computing background, how do we get this to interact with things in the environment? Oh, could I point at the computer and like have it send an email to someone so I don't have to like go over there? And so that started to be magical. It was like, whoa, there's more capabilities here. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. It's interesting what you're sharing as the magical thing is a situation we could have easily thought of before, but you're saying it's like possible to sort of do it or prototype it more easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, I want to circle back around because Pinar, I think you took my brief introduction direction really clearly. So, but 10 points for Gryffindor. But I think it would be great if we could learn just like a bit more about how you're using AI in your practice.
I guess so there's various ways we get involved with it, and we're trying to get more and more involved in different, I guess, life cycle stages, right? So obviously there's like the day-to-day tools we use, whether that's like large language models or diffusion models for our own like practice, and it's a very good, I think, partner in ideation. If you ask it to be a critical thinker or a devil's advocate, it's really good at it. Otherwise, it generally pleases you, which is very annoying. It's really good for some like landscape analysis, or even like in visuals, like mood boards, quick ideation, iteration. So it's really good for like day-to-day iteration. But as a practice, how we get involved in kind of the big picture systemic things is how do we get involved in the tool development itself, to ensure we're also looking into, when we say responsible AI or ethical AI, it feels like AI needs to be that. Well, actually, like, what is our responsibilities, and how do we have ethics show up in the process is a bigger question. Often the response comes up as like policies or principles, and I think, policy often lags, especially I think in this climate, it can be expected to lag. So there's even more, I think, that we need to look into, and like what are the bottom-up strategies that we could do. So with that, I think what's really interesting is looking into what's available out there, and how do you kind of intervene and tap into the existing technologies and systems and innovations to use them in a direction that can help designers and have AI as an actual collaborator and often co-creator in things. So one project that we're looking into with NVIDIA, obviously like NVIDIA with Isaac Sim, is basically like a digital gym for robots, right? So with GenAI, I think what happened is basically robots started to get really fit, because now there were all these scenarios that it's able to generate to train one robot for like 1,000 scenarios, right? So this tool already is out there and exists. And we were curious and like, well, okay, we're kind of looking into one hand and 1,000 scenarios. What if we look at 1,000 hands and one scenario and then generate more scenarios? So how do we actually use this in testing, in consumer testing, which, like, if you look at big corporations today, it's not necessarily very well done, right? Like, that's one thing we often talk about in IXD, like, how do we become better design researchers, and so that we inform design in a more ethical, inclusive way. And so if we want to talk about AI as a partner in helpful iteration, how can it also be helpful in kind of the ideation or in concept development phase, where it can raise red flags if something is inaccessible, where it can kind of start hinting out early on if we're incorporating too much material in, maybe that's going to result in a lot of plastic, right? So can it also be kind of this like safety guardrails, but also maybe an ethical partner in a design tool? Can it be a plugin? So we basically teamed up and also with WPP to kind of go into this existing tool out there that is now even more powerful when we started compared to when we started this 2 years ago. And how do we kind of start using this to our advantage to make the outcomes more inclusive for people in like all consumer goods, right? And you can go from wearable tech to, food packaging. And then eventually, obviously, open source this for organizations to kind of share their information and test with consumers. And this is by no means to replace co-creation or actual user testing, right? But this is more to raise more awareness in the design process. And because, designers are not, if we're creating inaccessible or inequitable outcomes or outcomes that are, have environmental costs, it's not that because, we're evil. I mean, it's more, it comes from lack of awareness, not even thinking because you're moving so fast. So how do we actually use AI to our advantage in this case? Where if AI is so good at thinking and generating scenarios, how can it actually help us become more ethical and, environmentally and socially responsible?
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to do a quick exercise I just invented here for a second, but I think it might be helpful. Because I'm hearing you describe like a number of different modes of interacting with GenAI or sort of its outputs. And we've touched on a few across the panel, but they're also different ones. So we're just going to do like a raise your hand exercise. I'm kind of curious. I'll try to put these in order. Okay. Just do you use, let's say in your daily practice, GenAI for like text generation and editing? You probably, no, interesting, okay. What about image generation or image like manipulation? Yeah, okay. Research? Yeah. Okay, cool. This is great. What about like more sort of co-thinking or as like a thought partner? Yeah, okay, interesting. Code generation? Yep, okay, well. And what about for more like agentic work, sort of like having the AI go do things asynchronously from your involvement with it?
Not yet.
Yeah, he said not yet. Okay, cool. All right. There's probably 10 others I didn't think of, but I was just trying to hear the various things you're mentioning. It's like fascinating we're really kind of describing a cluster of technologies that can do so many different things that almost talking about it only as GenAI is, trying to talk about all of it together becomes somewhat difficult. There's so many different modes. We'll do our best to kind of slice it up here or group them. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start with directing this to Federico, but I also encourage you all to please interrupt or build on each other. You don't need to hear me ping-ponging things around. You're the smart people. But I'm going to direct this first to Federico, because you're working on AI tools, I believe, more so than working with AI tools. Is that true? Or maybe it's both. Maybe you could describe the sort of relationship to you're close to the metal in some way, and then you're also using it.
I would say it's hard. I always struggle with this. Students have asked me this a ton in class. I feel a little bit desensitized at times because I am so close to what we're working on. And I also can see all the inconsistencies that exist. Like, we're tracking bugs, we're seeing how things are breaking, how things need to adapt to new form factors. There's new technologies and new functions that we're trying to fit into the tool. And so it's kind of like, behind the scenes, it's kind of like you're in a kitchen in many ways. And we're trying to serve these new innovations in different ways and new mechanisms. And I think equally, it's been really beautiful and like sometimes poetic, turning to the tool that I'm working on for help working on the tool. And so I would say like the things scale as easy or as simple as like taking all uppercase text, feeding it into a system and saying, turn it into all lowercase. Or how do I say this sentence in 2 words? Or this button, give me all the possible ways that I could translate this so I can like see the string and how it translates into all the different languages, that we built for. And it goes as like broad as sometimes asking it like, what are possible relationships that we can have with these technologies? And like, I sometimes ask it for stories. Like sometimes I'm trying to like break the context window or how long it can keep a consistent narrative. So I ask it to tell me stories in different paragraphs and like go longer. And I usually use a narrative of like a future optimistic world, trying to see what possibilities exist. And sometimes like I have seen very similar to like, I think a conversation that often happens with sci-fi is like, the imagination becomes reality and the reality turns into imagination. It's quite profound to see that. And so I also recognize that things are changing at great speed. So it's also one of the reasons why, I try to teach is to kind of pass on what I know as I'm learning it. But I also think that with these technologies, like no one really knows. And so that's part of like the excitement and also the responsibility that comes with it, which I think, if I think of it for students or anyone in the audience in this scenario, it's an incredibly leveling playing field. It raises everyone's perspective on what you can do, what you're capable of doing, even what you can hack together, right? And the potential of you even considering maybe I don't want to study this, I do want to do design. I think I personally came from fields in a history where like design was a little bit of like a second player or a second order effect of a thought. And I'm really excited by seeing these tools bring creative potential to reality. So we can go now from like idea to action in just like a sentence or a thought. And I think that we sometimes even forget how magical that is to even like someone 3 years ago that we could tell this and that it's true and it's free and it's available everywhere.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, Violet, you were mentioning earlier, this idea of this thing that we couldn't, where you're pointing to our email. That's funny example. I'm curious, the sense of being able to do something now that wasn't possible before, how is that affecting how you think about or the activities that are happening in the classroom?
I feel like very much so, like the level playing field is very true. So much of what I'm teaching is stuff that I'm learning very recently. We kind of joke that, you see someone that's like expert in LLM you're like, they learned about this when I learned about it when it just came out, right? Like we're like all trying to be experts, and I think actually a lot of people have spent more time, but it's all very new, and I think because of that, I'm also discovering the landmines around teaching it and what works and what doesn't.
Can you give us an example?
So, for example, things feel possible, which is awesome. Like a student might dream up an idea that's, 2 years ago I would have been telling them, no, there's no way you can accomplish that in a semester, like scope it back. But now it feels very doable, where it's like, this would have been a PhD like level research project, but now it seems like someone could tackle it in a semester. But you still run into the same landmines where it seems possible, and something that, this is just the same with any sort of like design and engineering project. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you back yourself into a corner. So I think a lot of design and technology is experimenting, trying things out, and oftentimes you realize that those things, something might be very doable, and it's hard to know if it is or not.
Oh yeah, interesting. Okay, Andrea, you're describing a set of projects or works you've worked on that have like very much made their way out into the world. Was that sort of like a linear experience for you, or was there a lot of the, kind of backing yourself into a corner and then coming back out of it?
I think, like anything in design and thinking, you have to make intentional decisions about using the tools that are available. And so just like in any point in time when computers were first sort of widely available for digital typesetting, there was a shift. Photography, much further back in time, photography and painting, there was a shift. And we are at a shifting moment in which these tools are not quite defined yet. They're still being developed daily. 2 weeks ago, there was a major development. And we'll certainly see more things being pushed out in the next year. So the sort of intention of engaging with this tool, and I agree with you, Randy, it's not one tool. So I misspoke there. It's a network of different tools. And figuring out how you stack them and compose them needs to be intentional. But I kind of wanted to connect with something you were talking about, backing yourself into a corner. Using any of these tools is not a matter of having it solve it for you. You still need to have an idea. You need to understand the context. You need to understand the craft. And you need to understand the history. And I actually find that there's quite a beautiful paradox in sort of this whole discussion. To me, generative AI is sort of a key moment in time in which we're looking so far into the future of being able to just like text and then get an image, that actually knowing why and how a relevant image should be created, meaning understanding the linear kind of continuation of the visual history, at least in my field of graphic design, is quite important. So in the time of AI, the history of visual culture becomes quite relevant. And that is because any contribution to culture needs to touch on cultural themes. If you don't understand where cultural visual threads have come from, it very certainly you'll generate things that are irrelevant, like monkeys on Mars, or a number of other AI prompted things that appear daily. But there's a number of practitioners within sort of the visual field that are embracing AI and creating things that it would take us a very long time, a week, a month to create. So some of the projects that I've been working on, including the book, for instance, it's like that's kind of like a seance of history of art. You're asking dead like incredible artists throughout the history of art to make new artwork. It's kind of magical in itself. And that artwork, you can direct it towards something, typography. That in itself was amazing. The artificial typography, which we call the book, was a good way, but that was just the first step, because then currently I'm sort of working a lot in trying to train models or understanding how to train models. And that means the source material doesn't come from the database, but rather comes from something that you've made and that you sort of help the AI remake and train in how that style looks and feels. There's other moments in which I collaborate with it to sort of, I'm designing a chessboard at the moment, and from the 2D version, which I don't use any 3D programs, so I don't have fluency over those. I can design, of course, in 2D. I can then turn that into sort of a set of 3D renderings with different materials, different textures, different settings in a matter of minutes. And I think that in itself is also like a powerful way of testing. And then it's my assessment and my curation and editorial vision and design vision that establishes what material composition, what sort of form factor that should actually take place. So I think actually if you understand them as tools, but really powerful tools, tools that can help you question your own work in a way, you are on the right path to kind of embracing them. And the unfortunate thing for whoever's feeling very uncomfortable at this moment, which I completely can sympathize with, is the fact that these are just going to be the next generation. They're just using it already. this is going to be baked into everything. It's already being baked into everything. So there's no escaping this. It's just, how do we understand and create an ethical, design-driven relationship that pushes culture forward in ways that are meaningful to the lineage of time? And that pushes craft, allows us to discover new things. So I think it's kind of a really wonderful time. I find it actually quite exciting, but with like all the weight of everything that came before.
This idea of the lineage for images to sort of, they kind of have to build on culture in order to impact culture or something, I think is quite an interesting idea. Like we see the recent, maybe the latest ChatGPT image making in the Studio Ghibli as an example of like a style, right? That, which I'm sure we have questions about or enthusiastic about or not, but it seems as though that's connected with culture broadly more so because people have an affinity to what that kind of imagery looks and feels like. You're endeared to that content. It's a precious thing that I think many people like. Even if you don't know the style, it's somehow an endearing style or something that I think lands or resonates with a much broader group than if we rewind a few years ago and got the kind of maybe default, techno optimism, orange and teal tinged like Mid-Journey solar punk default image style, right? Like these are two different ways that things can show up, but one maybe builds on a cultural line that is more broadly appealing in its like starting place or something. So I think it kind of like gets out to people faster, to their like hearts quicker. Maybe it's also why it like angers people faster too or something. But yeah. Okay, I'm curious that like so far we've talked about the relationship to AI and AI tools in a certainly a collaborative way, but in kind of a us with the tool way. And I'm curious, I'm going to direct this to you, Shar. I have a suspicion this may like fall into your practice, but I could be wrong. Like, how have you used, maybe in your own practice or in the classroom context, AI collaboratively? Meaning, how has it facilitated things happening between multiple people that wouldn't have happened otherwise? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. So at Columbia, I teach world building. In my class, we create an original governing method to gamify what is a writer's room context. And I developed that method of working with students with a project that I did a few years ago called Blockchain Fairytale. And Blockchain Fairytale was a rapid world prototyping facilitated experience where we took existential threats like climate disruption and we placed it in a fairy tale, like magical world building context. And then we used tools like Midjourney and ChatGPT to like rapidly develop new myths to talk about climate change that could exist 10,000 years in the future. And what I realized from those experiences is not only does GenAI offer us this sort of like magic portal into image generation and text generation, but what it does is it gives us a kind of like different sort of creative productivity. Like it gives us a different amount of productivity to shoot for. I mean, we all live under capitalism and the expectations of productivity are insane, frankly. And I think generative AI gives us a way to creatively augment our relationship to that. So instead of having people who are burned out, you have a room of people who are using these tools to augment the idea of fairy tale, augment their philosophical relationship to climate disruption, talk about existential threats together. And the speed with which that collaboration can actually generate results that they feel connected to and excited about is amazing. I mean, that's the real magic in it, is that it has this potential to bring together stories that feel really separate, but we have an opportunity to find connections in those stories using these tools that just kind of like upskills creativity. So, yeah.
My interpretation is that it's like quite an optimistic view. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it's optimistic. I think when you're working with different people and you're working with students, I think you have to meet them at where they are on their kind of journey with understanding AI, because it's it's a philosophical relationship, and it's also kind of a phenomenological relationship. Like, now that we have these tools, how do we look at human creativity and the future of human creativity? And I think there's, the future that I hope for, and I don't want to speak for all the panelists, but I'm sure this is true, the idea of like a co-creation space where human creativity is boundless and AI is a co-creator with that. That's where I hope to be. And that's where when I'm working with students and when I'm facilitating around this space, I really want to teach, a form of literacy that allows us to protect ourselves and not be erased by the technology. Because that's the exciting thing, is that we can go to stranger places and more surreal places with these tools. It is optimistic, yeah.
It feels like we're at this moment where, and this is what I think, Andrea and Federico were saying as well, is like, everything is moving so quickly, and that also means that we're at this moment almost, it feels like one of those moments where there was something like the internet emerged or the computer emerged. And so that's daunting because, social media emerged. It was amazing at first, and then what happened? Right. And so I think we're kind of at that moment where it feels important, where it feels like people in this room that are working with it have real power to change the direction or the course of history. What does it become? It can be all these amazing things where it's like this co-cooperator, that it's more about you being in this space with other people than you like clicking on a computer. But we kind of don't know where history is going to go, and like we have to lean in and make it go in the direction that we want.
I also think if we look at the camera as a sort of analog to this, we all have cameras on our phones, and there's millions of photos being taken, but is that pushing photography forward as a whole? And who is determining how photography as a field is moving forward in visual culture? I think part of history is sort of just a much older question, which is who determines history? Who determines what is artful, craftful, like meaningful, and so on? And that the tools are available is probably a good thing, because as Shar was saying, like, it creates more accessibility, and people can sort of interact with them and create meaningful things. But they also will create not meaningful things, as we know are very much being created in AI. And I think just in general, like, to me, this idea of figuring out what are our principles to determining what is good and bad, if that can be sort of a goal, meaning what is meaningfully contributing to culture and not, is important. But we need to re-understand a little bit our relationship to creation itself. It is a very different thing, I think. It's looking like it's just much more rapid in a way, and with tools that do so many jobs that we used to have to do either by hand or in a computer and spend hours, and now they're done.
I want to go to something, Shar, that you were talking about, which I think is quite profound and doesn't get talked a lot about, which is this idea of play, and this idea of having a sort of like an observer's perspective or an orchestrator's perspective. So as you were talking about your projects and what you do with the students, it reminded me a lot of games that I grew up playing. I was a fan of computer games like StarCraft and SimCity and The Sims and all of this, Age of Empires. I would nerd out through all these scenarios. And one thing that I've realized working on these tools or these systems is that they also provide a sort of a mechanism for me to observe different scenarios. And so I've even taken LLMs and made them role play different people or different things that I could tell in different things. And having a sort of safety where you can like prototype and create to your idea's desire, but come back with like a sort of a developed perspective of why something should work, and like thinking about the characteristics that go into shifting things and changing them. I think it's really, really profound, and it gives you a sort of like a more of like a. I become a little bit more like an altruist, and you're trying to mediate how these things are affecting each other, and trying to find like where are the leverage points or the dynamics that are changing, and so I think we need to encourage a lot more play. That's one of the things that I like to do a lot with LLMs, and so I really like that you brought it up, and I think that it doesn't get talked a lot about, which is creating a safe sort of like sandbox where you can push things to certain limits to develop awareness, but also like a sort of like an opinion on how things shape each other or how they should shape each other.
I'm so curious to take this. How have you either seen this applied or applied it yourself successfully or not in the classroom, like in the learning context where play and exploration is like, I mean, a common methodology and like necessary and important, but the tools are quite emergent, so everyone's kind of on a pretty even playing field in terms of familiarity with the tools, and almost always the outcomes are non-deterministic. Like it's all an experiment. You can ask for the same thing 10 times in a row and get 10 different things. Like, how do you facilitate that or teach around that kind of experimentation, like in a learning environment?
Yeah, I feel like you just have to get folks to really try things and engage making, because you really can't form an opinion about these things without getting a more intuitive sense for what works and what doesn't. Like, I think so much of interaction design is in and of itself dependent on the interaction. It has emergent behaviors. And once you have GenAI, if you're going to put any sort of AI into a system, you don't know, you might have an idea for a game, you don't know if it's going to be fun until you make it and play it. You like actually have to experience it and make it. And so I think there's more of a like trial and error method that needs to be, which like maybe play is great for.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like that is slightly putting a bit more pressure on the students, because I feel like now that you have this tool that will help you iterate more and try and maybe have a partner to critically think with, you know, what are you coming up with then, right? Like even in your first iteration, right? Like now, do we as educators also have a higher expectation in your first iteration that we're seeing? Should you have done more, right? Like now knowing like maybe you could have had more alternatives to assess, right? And I think it's interesting to think about like like running, like using as a tool in the classroom. I think exactly like you learn by doing. There is no like fixed scenario. I once hosted a debate with AI, and the students had like debate teams, and they had to debate with AI on the future of AI, and it was very interesting. And then like you respond as it comes, But I think in the long run, what does this do? Like, how does it impact an educator's expectation onto expectations from students too? I think, in the past, it used to be like, well, just Google it. Like, did you Google it? Right? Like, but now I feel like, did you, iterate it 20 times already? Like, how does that change? I sometimes think about it.
I think a lot of these questions have to do with what kind of output are we looking at from the students. And I think it depends on, because we're all sort of experienced designers here in certain ways. And I think it's a bigger question in education, which is like, now that these tools exist, are we looking at like productivity in students to output materials like papers and final projects? Or are we looking to measure the experience that we believe they're having in the classroom? And I think it's a really interesting question, because the education that I experienced was fully based on productivity, and somehow the only way to gauge whether or not I was engaged is, did you get an A on your paper or did you not? And I think that's changing, and I think that's really interesting, because that brings play back into the conversation.
Students are leaving.
They're leaving. Go play. But I wanted to bring something up, because I think there's there's part of this conversation that I always feel like is often missing from these panels, and the idea of perfection is being like completely torn apart by AI in a really exciting way. Some of us in this room, I'm sure, have created data sets, as you were talking about. That's a crazy experience in itself because of the amount of input you have to actually put in to do that. But I personally, as like a researcher and a practitioner with AI, I'm really interested in when it sort of hallucinates or isn't perfect. And I can see the kind of fraying model that's in front of me. And I think students are very completionist minded. They're perfectionists. They're there to learn, but they're also there to succeed. And I feel like we give AI a lot of openings to make mistakes. And I kind of try to have that attitude now with my students too, where even though they can be on this production timeline that's so much more rapid and they can get a lot done, and even if they can't code in Python, now they can because they have ChatGPT, I think the educational hallucinations that are going to come out of AI is going to shift the way that we think about productivity and the way that we think about student experience. So I'm excited for that.
I want to share 2 quick stories of a class that I just wrapped up. And the first one was I was trying to share with my students a new technology that just came out at the time. This was like 3 months ago. And I give them an activity. It was like the second day class that we had. And we divided it into groups. Each set of students had a topic like transportation, education, food, the arts, etc. And their goal was to write an article in 2030 about the future. You could write anything you wanted. They had to talk to each other about it. Some students are here, so it's very familiar. They had no idea what it was for. And the whole goal was they each group had to write 1 paragraph about that future. I asked them all to put their paragraph, and they had to write the headline and everything as if it was like a newspaper that we were reading. And then I took that document and I fed it into Notebook LM, which is a tool that we launched at the time that allows you to take any document and turn it into a podcast or an audio kind of like description of it. And showing the students what each one was saying through a conversation that no one knew what each other group was going to say was incredibly fun. Some students were very skeptical, and they added like these crazy things that happen, like cars start like going out, and like they kill like a rapper, and like someone in the transportation side, in the food side was like food starts becoming like this thing that everyone starts making at home, and all these ideas. And showing them that you could have that and that you could develop it, that was really profound. And then towards the end of class, we were having of the semester, we were having a conversation about career and getting interviews and getting jobs. And I had asked the students for anyone to submit their website or their portfolio for critique. We would critique it in class and give them feedback. Everyone was very scared. Only one student was brave enough to submit their website. And I was so, proud of that student. Her background was not in design. She was, very shy. And so I did this really interesting thing that I hadn't even tried. I was trying a new feature, which was bringing Notebook LM's technology to Gemini. And I took a screenshot of her entire website. I turned it into a PDF, and then I fed it into the system to generate a podcast about her. And I told the students in class, I was like, look, if you're practicing for an interview, if you don't even know what to say, let's see what they would say about Sue. And we hit play, and we heard 2 podcast hosts talk about this wonderful student. And just hearing 2 people talk about you and your career, and even see what they highlighted, she had this incredible scholarship in Korea. It's like, guys, say that. Say that exact thing in your interview. Is a mechanism of using play, but also I think demystifying and giving them power to really turn it also for their utility. And I hadn't even tried that. It literally came up in the moment where I was like, let me see if this even would work and what it would do. And it did it really well. So try that. You can bend and create a lot of alchemy, I think, with these tools that they're generative for that intent. And I think we can't go too much into the convergent model. We need to keep exploring them and sharing these ideas. Yeah.
Great, beautiful. Thank you. Wow, that's exciting. Okay, we've got maybe 25 minutes left or so, in the room. So I think we're going to turn questions open to the audience because I'm sure many of you are curious, intrigued, have lines of inquiry. There are microphones here at the front of each set of stairs. So feel free to just come up and ask your question. Yeah, we probably have time for maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 5. Are you making your way down from the back? That's good. No. Oh, great.
Question or observation. We teach an online advertising portfolio class for people that want to into advertising design, etc. And for the first time in many, many, many years of teaching, we give in-depth conversations, talk about work ideas, and then bringing it to execution.
I'm going to give you my mic so you can. Yeah.
A student had asked while we were commenting on her work, what prompt would you use? And I could have answered it, except that we were already running a half hour over. But I find that because of access, there's a rush to skip steps. And this class, as many creative classes are, it's about taste, intuition, and experience, and building on that and your idea. And especially in art direction, it's about making the right decisions, not necessarily having the ability to create it. But there's a sense of, now I can do that. Forget about the experimenting. Sure, show me 25 versions and we'll talk about what the prompts should be. But I think that's going to be a challenge, to enjoy the process and the experience versus getting to the end. So.
I mean, I'll just say that I found myself even in those, like making those same mistakes where I put a little too much faith in the system. I'm like working on concepts for some interaction design that's going to be based on some like conversation. And I'm trying to workshop the idea. And I just keep feeding things into ChatGPT and it keeps giving me like lists of ideas that are so nonsensical. And I'm like angry, it's not better. I'm like, give me a good idea. And then I'm like, wait, I should step back and come up with an idea. And it's like, I think we're all kind of struggling with that. Like, do you brute force make something else think for you? And it's good at creating ideas, but you kind of have to do the fundamental. Yeah, I don't know, like how we fight that even in ourselves.
And even, before reaching an idea, I think, synthesizing, it may get very much, much better, but like at the present, it really is not. And I remember when ChatGPT first came out, I was like having it summarize the books that I've read before and then asking it to give me the key insights. And none of the insights it was giving me were the insights that I landed on, because it doesn't have my lived experience, my point of view, right? And obviously if it got to know me better, then it would maybe be better at giving those insights, but it also rushes to solutions rather than just delivering an insight. And we're not slowing down to synthesize things and rushing to outcomes. And that's one of the concerns I have with these tools.
Okay, great. On the microphone.
I'm a freshman at for the BFA design program at SVA, and I guess even today I was talking with my classmates about what our future is going to be like with AI. A lot of the entry-level jobs or even the internships, they can easily be replaced by AI. So I just wanted to know what your opinions were.
What I often tell students, and I think this is going back to kind of the end of perfectionism, as an employer, I'm really not interested in seeing a shiny object final outcome solution, right? In my mind now, that can be generated by an AI. But if a student is really walking me through the process that they went through and what they did in those, which research methods you identified, right? How did you land on those insights? Which guidelines did you create to frame your work later on, right? That process, all companies need people who actually really make good effort in that process, right? Whether you're working with AI or not. So I think I'm actually excited about that, because to me, designers, we tend to jump to solutions. We want to show that fancy outcome. But I think it's forcing us to refocus on the design process itself and think of ways in how we can showcase that. And I think that is becoming more and more important. And I think with AI, and I've heard this, so don't quote me, but this is like a saying, what we called soft skills are being reframed as power skills, because this is your human side is going to complement AI, right? So I think there's great value in mastering communication, strategic thinking, critical thinking skills, as well as really emphasizing and focusing on the process itself than the outcome, and presenting that also in your interviews.
You're so much better than ChatGPT too. I think I think we're also at a time where, because it's easier to do these kind of low-level tasks with AI, that there's also a lot of kind of opportunities, or a big reason that I left a big company was so that I could start my own company. And I don't think that would have even really been, like, the stuff we're doing wouldn't be possible without having AI code generation. Like, we'd have to hire a huge team. So I think, while jobs are changing, there might also be opportunities where, like, maybe you can even work on something of your own with your peers and, like, start something. Yeah.
I want to plus 1,000 to the starting something. I think we were all in your shoes, and I sympathize a lot. But I want to offer you a little bit of a counterpoint that I talk in class a little bit, which is that people hire people. And so if you are someone who makes yourself available, if you make yourself seen, if you find creative ways of standing out, I guarantee you that someone will give you an opportunity. And I'll leave you with like two quotes that, I've had in two separate conversations with two good friends that have been like mulling in my mind. And the first one is that craft, which we talk about a lot, and in design, it's really about like, can you show me that this is like really exquisite and really well done? He said, craft is attitude made visible. And it really struck me. Craft is attitude made visible. And where I felt energized by that is that it brings a sense of your identity. It's like, what is your perspective? What is your opinion on things? So when you're thinking about how to stand out with craft, think about yourself, think about your background, where you're from. There is only one like you who can do it. And the second one was that quality always finds a home. This was a separate conversation. We were talking about like, how do good people keep getting good work, and how do you establish that? And I was complaining about some stuff, and my friend was like, Fede, quality always finds a home. And so I think if you focus on doing great work and making an impact, but also finding creative ways to bring your attitude and your personality to it, I guarantee you that it's bound to happen. I think you have to hear a lot of stories of how many people got jobs, and I promise you it's like the wild... Randy's laughing. It's the wildest, sometimes more sporadic, more spontaneous side of things that you connect with. The designers that I've vouched to hire are people that I find interesting, and people that I'm like, the visual wasn't perfect, but we can get them there. So yeah, don't lose touch in that.
Just like one kind of follow-up question. Like you mentioned that I guess like the ideas are like having more human ideas or more authentic ideas. Those are becoming more valuable with AI. So I guess from my perspective, it kind of feels like there will be a lot of more director positions rather than like people working under directors. And I'm still a freshman. I still have like, I don't know how much more AI will be developing over the next 4 years, but it's kind of concerning. Like, what am I gonna do right after graduation? I don't think I'm fully equipped to be that director position yet. I just wanted to hear your opinions and what you, yeah.
Well, I mean, first, just to maybe do a counterpoint to the optimism, it is going to shift. The whole field that we're in is going to shift. I think it's hard to deny that, when you had a photographer, an illustrator, a 3D artist, those things can be prompted and generated really quickly. But that's maybe an opportunity, because just like, it would take hundreds of hours to understand how to sculpt something. It would take you maybe a week to understand how to really sort of interact in a way with AI to generate something that's worthwhile. But then the question still remains, what is a good, meaningful design against something else? So taste is still important, and taste is something that's continuously changing. And as a newcomer into the field, you are establishing taste by simply and intuitively interacting with the space around you. And these tools allow you to kind of have that interaction in a more fluid way. So I think there's those two factors. One is your taste is unique to you and your age group and sort of all of the things that contributed to your experience being real. And what you select and how you curate is unique to you. The second thing is that if you stay close to these tools, you're going to be probably an expert at them. And that means your value is going to be pretty high for the people that you named, the directors, who may not be as close to the things that are changing. This is just not something that is like different to what's happened before. There used to be photo typesetters, and before that, there were like, people.
Drafters in architecture, right? Who just
exactly. There were like, letterpress. Like, all of this stuff has shifted, and yes, jobs shift. People are gonna like have to figure out what to do next. But again, the core thing is a printed page has certain values. And I have to disagree with one thing, with a quote, craft is attitude made visible, right? I think craft is one thing and attitude is another thing. There can be really powerful attitudes that have really crappy craft, okay? And so that means like an attitude can be really like relevant. You could be like, whoa, that's really cool. I've never seen that art direction, that composition, that sort of attitude. And yet its craft may not be perfect at all. When there can be really perfect craft that has zero attitude whatsoever. So to me, this is taste, and this is style, and this is the time that we live in, and understanding culture and why we've gotten here, and interacting with it and studying it and building on it and now producing into it, making. And this is where play, iteration, and all of that is really, really powerful. Like those principles are not the same. And I want to mirror something that was said. Process now becomes super important. And it's sort of, how do you engage with the ideas? First of all, how do you engage with the time that you're in, with the briefs, with the context? And then generate the ideas, and then use these tools to make stuff. And it's that, when I say it that way, make stuff and tools can be substituted with a number of other sort of tools that existed in the past. It is a scary time, but it's also one that offers like tons of different things. Like if you think about it the other way, we're breaking every mold that existed. And so we should sort of meaningfully shape the future of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, our next question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Yvonne. I'm a cartographer with local government. What Shar said about like, climate disruption and Andrea said about contributing something culturally meaningful made me think of a question I grapple with often at work, which is, how do you justify solving a task with AI rather than doing it without the assistance of AI in the context of environmental rights and human rights? And in other words, what is the ethical reasoning you consider to allow yourself to use AI that makes it worth the sacrifice of natural resources or justice?
No, I love this question. I mean, at Sour, we say there's enough sugar coating in the world, so it's time to get real and be sour. And I think that's it's a really uncomfortable area, right? But the biggest thing about it, and I sometimes talk about this to students too, who like, oh, but like I don't want to work with the big corp because they're evil, right? So if everybody who thinks like you kind of gives up on these tools or does not work with big corp, then what happens to these tools and the big corp, right? Like to me, I think for you to be able to start thinking about how you might be more energy efficient, how you might use less water in data centers, like how we can be more ethical, you first need to understand what's happening out there. And for that reason, you need to be close to it. Right. So I'm not saying use mindlessly and run prompts 24 hours a day. Right. You can still talk about responsible use and not like non-wasteful use. But I think it is like almost more because it's changing so fast. Right. Like everything is happening so fast, yet systems are not set to change this fast. So it's going to become a big problem in many outside of design too. It's going to have huge implications. But if people in nonprofit space and people in ethics, safety don't get involved in diverse ways, not just policy and principles, right, then we're not going to have these diverse conversations or even like people with your mindset in the room, right? For me, like I'm sure in a lot of these companies, half of the engineers are probably questioning the same things or are equally as frustrated about some of these things, right? But they should be in there so that there is a possibility to be even able to like look into and understand how we might shift things. Like when in 1950s, there was like big ads for like throwaway culture and everything was plastic and nobody was going to do dishes anymore, and it was fascinating, and suddenly plastic was everywhere and all of us designers were designing with plastic until we saw what the consequences were like years later, and now we're grappling with that. So I think to learn from that, to learn from what happened with social media, we should start questioning pretty early on. And one good thing, silver lining I think with AI is it's so obvious, to show you what the problems might be because it's moving so fast, right? Like if there's bias, you're seeing that immediately. If it's, I think like developing one image is like equivalent of like charging your iPhone or something. Like there was a study recently. So like it is giving us fast data on the potential risks. So I think as you're using, you should always be questioning, like, okay, how can this be more efficiently so we don't do this? Or can I get involved in that space? But to get involved in that space, you still need to be understanding the tools and how they work and who are the players, right? So to me, I don't want to sound like keep your enemies closer, but like you should really have a close relationship at a time where everything is shifting every day and no one really knows everything because there are so many unknowns. So that would be my kind of attitude in like justification as a mission-driven studio, being in this space, because we have to understand it in order to be able to even address it in the future. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
I also think local and efficient models and like developing technology, just because it's a large language model doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be super resource intensive. I think a lot of like the cloud compute and the way that modern computing and even the internet is structured is like very inefficient. So I think there's a lot of development to be done there.
Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Charles and I'm an engineer working in the voice AI space. So my question is, as the interaction between humans and technology is changing with the introduction of Meta Ray-Ban glasses, how do you think design is going to adopt or evolve for those type of interactions?
I can't not answer this. If there's anything I'm like, everyone has their own AI fears about what's going to come about. My fear is that everyone's going to adopt glasses. And I don't think it's a good idea, but it's just being it's become almost a truth that that's what the future looks like because Meta's doing it and like every other company is doing it, Apple's doing it. We're all going to wear glasses and we're all going to see. The thing that really terrifies me is that we already saw the filter bubble of the social media. Now, if I see a different world than you see because like Apple said, like I should look at these stores, now we really can't have any political conversation. I don't even like know what your world is. So that is my like terror. And so I think we really have to like grab the reins right now about where the world is headed. And it's so important to, I'm kind of a pessimist and like I'm working on this company. I'm like, you know, all we want to do is try and make something that's not that. But I feel the pressure and the force of like, I don't have Apple money or Meta money behind me, right? I think we need to fight what is just told is going to be the future, because it's like you said, like keep the enemies close, but like this future is coming one way or not. Let's not just like jump on the train, but like let's have like really try and direct where it's going to go. Yeah.
I would just add that I think part of what is so electrifying and terrifying about this new technology, we're sort of like the earthquake has hit, the seismic event has happened, and we're all just like, whoa, what was that? And then it's about to happen again, probably in another 2 weeks, right? And and I think generally with the political landscape, there's so much shock and awe just like hitting us right now. And I think this kind of hits all three questions. The idea that like the best action you can take is to become literate in this. And I know that it feels like you're kind of bunking with the enemy when you do become literate in this. But if you don't, then you're potentially missing important conversations and inroads that you could have to really resist in super effective ways. Because like part of the idea is that all of this is happening so quickly that you're just going to be frozen. And I cannot tell people enough to break through that as much as possible, because the only way that we can move forward at all is if we're unfrozen. So in general, but for design, I mean, I feel like the glasses thing scares me too, as someone who, you know, is like a personality glasses person. I don't really want to wear Google Glass. But I mean, I think it has the potential to design, you know, even wearables for the future that are crazy. I just want to really quickly shout out, Core 77 does speculative future design programs, and there's one that I was reading about that was all about wearing these sort of like insect and amphibian inspired wearables to test food and air that might be toxic around us. Like, let's move from Google Glass to this, you know?
I want to offer a little bit of like a slightly different perspective to the glasses discourse, which is that the world is very uneven still and will remain so for a very long time. And I still feel that design has a huge role to play there. You know, I think when we talk about this, we're kind of like at the forefront, the bleeding edge, especially in New York, where we have like access to so many things, and so many things are happening that are having impact everywhere. But somewhere, someone is just trying to teach their community about design. And they didn't have a professor, they didn't go to school. They're trying to solve, you know, how to design a poster for a class, for a piano teacher. And I think that, you know, these people have never had an opportunity to think about design. And so whenever I get too much into this, like, you know, bleeding edge, first world sort of like thinking, I remind myself of where I'm from. I'm from Colombia, you know, and it's like, I am enamored by the way people solve problems in very new ways, innovative ways that I could never think of doing, and how so much of that is born in context and in culture. And so I think that, you know, if you feel like design, you know, is running out or is going to be a solved problem, like step outside and just see the way the world is and how chaotic it is and how unscripted it is in many ways. And I promise you'll fall back in love. Like that's what I try to do, is I try to like think about any magnitude of problem and just realize how unfinished it is. we've solved, typography and beautiful aesthetics to a certain extent, but there are so many things about relationships, about, how we relate to our communities, to ourselves, to our friends, to our parents, to each other, that I think benefits from design. So, I'm a steward for design always having a role, and I think we can't lose faith, and we need to promote that more, and remind each other that there are so many more problems also to solve than the ones we have now. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I think we probably have time for one more question, and we'll allow you the last word.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This has been really enlightening. My name is Monica, and I have actually a two-part question. You all seem like very proactive users of AI, and in many ways use AI the way I use AI. But I'm wondering if you can speak about some of the moments when AI has not worked for you. Like, what do those fights look like when you're like, oh, I'd like to make this quick graphic, and then 10 minutes later you're like, no, maybe I should have just sketched this out in Procreate. At one point, is it actually the better choice not to use these tools? When are they not being good enough? And what's your thought process for making those decisions? And then my second question was about ownership. So we haven't really talked about, copywriting AI work. Where the government is on that is you can't copyright anything that has been created by AI. And that, at least for me, has been one of those moments where I've had to stop and be like, well, is it worth me running this text through AI if I want to copyright this document? Or should I just go back to editing by myself, which will take longer, but what's the value in doing that? So I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
Yes. So I can share. Before I got to this panel today, I was at work, and I read through the questions for the panel, and I immediately panicked, as I always do with questions. I was like, ooh. And I was like, oh, I have to do an intro. So what's my intro going to be? Because I could talk about a bunch of different things and take too long to talk about it. And so I asked ChatGPT to make an intro for me for this panel, and the intro was terrible. I was like, that's not what I should say. That's ridiculous. Like, AI. Let me go to this panel on AI now. I think for a lot, I think I like to use ChatGPT to sometimes help me with clarifying what my writing is actually about, because I think great writing is really clear writing. But sometimes it does a terrible job. Like the version of my bio that I read, if I had told you guys what that was this evening, you would have been like, I don't think she should be here. But your second question, so there are a lot of ways that I see professors engaging with AI that scare me. For instance, I read all of my students' papers because I want to and I'm excited about it, but there's a trend in education where a lot of people are running papers through ChatGPT and getting comments for that. And so I think the scary thing for me is wow, so we're entering a space where AI is kind of subtracting the amount of human engagement that we actually have with our students and with each other. So when you are thinking about whether or not you want to use a GenAI tool, think about the personal engagement with your practice and whether or not it actually serves you. If it's faster and that serves you, fine. But for me today, using ChatGPT to come up with a bio for this was a disaster, and that's not the way that I want to engage with the panel. So I share that only as an example, but so that's how I would reflect on it.
I want to add something to the first question, maybe not so much the second. That when I'm not clear on an idea, the outcome out of the generation shows me that. So if I don't understand it or I can't describe it well, it means I don't have the sort of intellectual definition to be able to generate the thing. Sometimes it's also process. I don't understand how to concatenate multiple sort of tools together, and therefore I sort of get the process, the thing that I think I'm going to get stunted. But in some way, that's also true just of other tools. And so I think it could be, if you look at it the other way, it could be a really good way to kind of check whether there's enough meat on your ideas, and whether you do really understand it. A lot of friends who are directors or artists are using it, and they end up they're generating videos and entire music videos, let's say. And it takes them just as long to create it through AI than it would take them to shoot it. And this is true of, I think, a lot of us who have practiced with it. It takes time, and it takes trial and error, and it is a different form of play. And I think, again, looking at it as a testing ground for ideas is probably the best way, and as a way in which some of them may float up or down. And I'm always looking for when I'm surprised by something in it, and it often can surprise you. So figuring out in your process how you give it space to doing that. But yeah, it starts with you.
I can share a couple anecdotes of AI breaking or you getting stressed. I get stressed sometimes when I'm engaging with these tools, and I'm also, working on them. I'll give you an example. So for me, when I think about these tools becoming ineffective is when it's taking too many turns to generate a small detail, where I get lost in the detail. And the problem with that is that these tools are so capable. It's like, hey, generate me, a mood shot of, this setting and the light is hitting perfect. And you're like, you see it. You're like, wow, this is amazing. It took 3 seconds to do it. You're like, that little glimmer, yeah, not quite right. So you're like, generate a background in a mood that has it's 4 p.m., it's in Paris, the light is hitting through the window. And then you get it and you're like, but the chair is off now. And you're like, so you start getting capricious. Whenever you feel yourself getting capricious, step back, because you're losing touch with the process and with the experience that you should feel. But I'll give you a workaround that I think many people, I think could benefit from, whether you're experienced or not. The first thing is think of your prompt as context. That's really what it is. You're grounding the tool on what you want it to do, and the more information, no matter how broad or how much range or vibrancy you want to give it, the better. So the context windows and the token size of these tools has grown dramatically. You can feed them hours of video and ask it where, to the minute, to the second, something appeared or what they talked about and where, right? They're incredibly powerful. So think of your prompt as context, and similar to what Andrea is saying, when you're struggling to get the answer, go back and think, how could I anchor this? Or if you're doing a visual element, do a rough sketch of what you want and use that as a sample image for your in-painting, right? That's a way to give it context and ground it. And the second thing, which I think many people don't think about, I told a student recently this, is if you're having trouble prompting, and this goes back to Shar, your observer playmaking, tell the prompt to generate a prompt that would be great for an LLM to generate. And I promise you, you might laugh, you might think it's comical. Go home and do it, and then you'll understand the power of the tool. And you can even go as far. I was trying to teach my dad how to use, Midjourney. He's an architect, and he was reworking his office. And I was like, let's generate a little mock of what it could be. He was getting capricious, oh, Fed, no, but the concrete is not the right one that I'm looking for. And I was like, okay. So I told the LLM, I was like, okay, generate 10 prompts. One of them is very artistic, one of them is very architectural, one of them is utilitarian, one of them we're going to go Bauhaus, and you're going to explain to me why you wrote the prompt. Some of them are going to be longer than 10 sentences, some of them are going to be shorter, and we're going to feed them all to the system. And you can do that in a matter of minutes. And what you'll realize is you'll start developing a taste, a seasoning, a sort of desire that you're looking for. And to Andrea's point, you'll start developing a perspective on, oh my God, when I use this, how does it work? And so I think Midjourney does a great job of this. I don't know if they still do it, but I think in many cases they do. They show you the prompt that some images generated, some of them that are out and displayed. And there are so many little details that you can pick up from just language and history and the arts of you can specify the film grain. You can specify the aspect ratio of an image. You can specify, not just the comparison of something, but, mixing two things together. And I just think that's incredibly powerful. And so don't feel, when you're feeling struggle, step back and be a little bit more creative and play play with it. Be like, hey, if critique my prompt. I told my dad that. It's like, you write now, if you think it's so easy. He's like, a building with blah, 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 and the concrete and the lighting. And it generated like this like regular image. I was like, you see that when you try to explain to someone, just like you trying to share an idea or a solution, it's difficult. And oftentimes, words don't do it justice. Oftentimes, you have to ramble and reshape that narrative and then feed it to the system. But be creative with it, right? And shine a little bit of a mirror back to the tool, and I think you'll start seeing a lot of sparks ignite in different ways. So,
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good on time, good on experience. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Violet, Federico, Andrea, Shar, Pinar. Thank you, Chris Cyphers and the Provost office for hosting this and having us, and thanks everyone for showing up with your attention, interest, and questions. Appreciate you. Now go be surprised.